Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, Ty West's X Trilogy. X, Pearl, and Maxxine, and the potential and problems of bringing this modern classic horror saga into Dead by Daylight as a licensed chapter. Cinema is back. It's a statement we hear every summer from critics, filmmakers, and theatre companies. We heard it before when Barbenheimer rocked the box office in 2023, when Top Gun Maverick hit a year before, and we heard it again this year when non-franchise flicks like Twisters, Challengers, and Civil War hit the ground running in the aftermath of the Hollywood strikes. But if you're a horror fan, this sentiment might come across as a little bit confusing, because from where I'm standing, cinema never left. Since the pandemic, horror cinema has been going from strength to strength. And in 50 years, when I am old and grey and doing the lore deep dive for the Dead by Daylight Wendy's crossover chapter, the 2020s might be remembered as one of the best decades in horror cinema history. We've had so many great pieces of horror cinema since the pandemic. Like, seriously, you guys, The Substance is in cinemas right now and you need to go and see it. Holy fuck, it's so amazing. But in my opinion, there's nothing that has so encapsulated the success of post-lockdown horror cinema quite like the X Trilogy. The brainchild of horror veteran Ty West, and starring the modern-day scream queen Mia Goth. The three movies jump between different time periods in the 20th century and follow the lives of two characters. Pearl, who grew up on a farm in Texas during the First World War, with dreams of being a star, and Maxxine, a porn actress who also aspires to see her name in lights, whose story takes place during the 70s and 80s. All three movies, X, Pearl, and Maxxine, are very different tonally and thematically while still feeling like a coherent whole that for the most part you can enjoy separately from each other. Today we'll be looking into what makes these movies tick as landmarks of modern horror history, checking out what they could offer for a licensed chapter and any potential issues that could come about from bringing the X Trilogy to Dead by Daylight. But before we get going, I just want to address a state of spoilers for the three films in the X Trilogy. It's impossible to talk about the series as a whole without going into spoiler territory for X, because understanding the plot of Maxxine especially is completely dependent on X. Unlike Maxxine, Pearl works fine when viewed on its own, but it's different enough that I'll need to talk about it independently. So go and watch them right now if you care about spoilers for X and Pearl, because they will be full and unmarked. Maxxine on the other hand is fairly new and only just hit digital media, so I'll try and steer clear of spoilers where I can. But you should definitely still watch the film just so this video can make sense completely. Also, it's just really good. So let's begin then by talking about X, the film that brought this world to audiences for the first time and introduced us to Mia Goth's two leading characters, Maxxine and Pearl. X follows an ensemble cast of young filmmakers in 1979 Texas who go out to make an adult film on the royal property of an elderly couple. The couple in question do not take kindly to this, and the emergent jealousy that Pearl and Howard feel towards these young people doing sexy times in their guest house leads to a night of bloodshed reminiscent of early slasher movies, especially 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film was received with rave reviews from critics, made 15 times its budget at the box office, and I ranked it as my favourite film of 2022. One of my favourite things about X, and I'd argue a big reason why the film was received so well by critics, is because it brought Pearl and Howard to life in ways that humanised them without falling into the classic slasher trap of, oh, these sexy young people are evil and immoral and must be punished for their sins. It'd be very easy for West to establish these angry old people living in 70s rural Texas as religious nutcases punishing what they see as sin. And while it's implied the couple are religious to a degree, it's obvious that their primary motive is their own deadly sins of envy and lust. Pearl is mentally damaged and Howard is physically infirm. They can't have the active sex life that the youngsters have, and their murderous intentions come more out of sheer human bitterness than anything else. That and Howard covering up for Pearl's impulsive decisions. They're understandable but not forgivable, which is refreshing for an old school slasher movie like this that could have just made them either cacklingly evil or just misunderstood. Pearl and Howard provide the sparks that light this wonderful cast of young victims up like a powder keg, with Mia Goth's character Maxxine at the centre of the chaos but with plenty of screen time devoted to the others, as if Ty West was dangling their lives in front of us like bait. Come on, Lorraine's played by Jenna Ortega, so she's gotta live, right? No, she's toast. All of the conflicts between the filmmakers in X are carefully thought out, with every argument having a reasonable point on either side, and while nobody here is perfect, everyone is at least arguing in good faith and generally has their heart in the right place. The characters are developed like actual humans, even though you know most of them are going to die, and it makes you invested in finding out who is going to make it out. Ty West and Mia Goth have both gone on record saying that the choice to develop these disputes in an intelligent way before the bodies start dropping was very intentional. It was a middle finger to the classic Friday the 13th style of making annoying flat characters just to kill them off. And for what it's worth, I think it's handled brilliantly. X's cast is probably its best element, and it's why I think it's my favourite of the 3 films in the trilogy. And here's where I'm going to start bringing in Dead by Daylight, because there's so many potential survivor choices here, and yet still one obvious answer. The full filmmaker team consists of 2 actresses, Bobby Lynn and Maxxine, the actor Jackson, the camera operators RJ and Lorraine, and the executive producer and Maxine's boyfriend Wayne. And let's be honest, any of these would be acceptable survivors. They all have their own charm and distinct personalities, and no matter which of them could make it into the game, I'm sure nobody would be upset to see the others' legendary cosmetic options, especially Lorraine. You think people wouldn't kill to play as Jenna Ortega or Kid Cudi in Dead by Daylight? But it's transparently clear who among them stands head and shoulders above the rest. The sole survivor and final girl of X, and if you're not aware of which character that is, I'll give you a clue. The 3rd film is named after her. Mia Goth's Maxine Minx is the heart and soul of this film, plain and simple. She becomes Pearl's fixation and the final reason that Pearl gets off her ass and starts killing the crew members. She's the only one left when the bodies finish dropping, and we learn in the epilogue that religious sermons running in the background in the movie were carried out by her father, who's still looking to recapture her. Mia Goth is even double cast in X, something I didn't realise until I looked at the cast list after my first viewing and saw that she also played the geriatric Pearl, after hours and hours in the makeup chair. The double casting of Goth was a calculated choice by West, because he realised that the duality between Pearl and Maxine was the film's central pillar, so getting Goth to play both characters just serves to underline that. And it's helped that Mia Goth is such a great performer who was so committed to the picture that she was able to make both roles shine at once. But deep in the fires of a New Zealand backlot, a second film was made. A production team on a break after filming Avatar: The Way of Water. An actress with enough charisma and prowess to carry the thematic heart of the movie in 2 roles at once. A filmmaker with ambition enough to shake up horror cinema in 2022, not just once, but twice. And a little bug that shook the world, but made this film a complete no-brainer. Let's talk about Pearl. Pearl is the prequel to X, set in 1918, during the final days of the First World War, when America was gripped by the Spanish flu. It stars, well, Pearl, the old woman who does most of the killing in X, now a young lady played once again by Mia Goth, taking on the role as an origin story and character study for X's primary villain. The movie was filmed concurrently with X on many of the same sets they used for X, in Manawatu in New Zealand, a country lauded across the world for its excellent COVID responses that Ty West cited as the one place on Earth where it's safe to make a movie. West recruited the crew from Avatar: The Way of Water since they'd all gone through the required self-isolation and COVID controls, and with A24's blessing, just started filming the movie in secret as soon as X wrapped. Pearl is a very different beast from the original film. X was inspired by 1970s Grindhouse horror that matched the film's 1979 setting, especially the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Pearl had a similar relationship with its setting and source material. Pearl is set in 1918, when cinema was first starting to get off the ground and silent pictures were becoming mainstream, and Pearl therefore owes a lot to the early productions of Hollywood like Douglas Sirk's Filmography and 1939's The Wizard of Oz. Pearl tells the story of a wannabe dancer and showgirl, entranced by this blossoming new industry that lets young women step out of mundanity and into lives of glitz and glamour, but her overbearing mother and disabled father tie her down to the failing family farm. This leaves Pearl with a struggle that she spends the entire film boiling with rage over. Her husband Howard is away at war, her mother seems to hate her guts, and she has no prospects beyond swiping at the dream of showbiz. And as the disappointment of reality hits her like a truck, she takes it out on everyone near her, cementing her as the serial killer we know her to become by the time of X 60 years later. It's a testament to the quality of Mia Goth's acting that she's able to make this erratic, unstable young woman who's almost childlike in her inability to accept reality or show restraint, an iconic and sometimes sympathetic protagonist, even as she slides into psychosis and murder. Goth not being nominated for Best Actress at the 2023 Oscars was considered a major snub by almost anyone who saw the film, and remains to this day one of the great tragedies of the Oscars anti-horror bias. Side note, I really hope this doesn't come into play this year as well, because Demi Moore and Coralie Fargeat need to walk off that stage in March next year with so much gold they can barely walk. But that's a rant for another video. Seriously guys, go watch The Substances in cinemas now, and it's really, really fucking good. But it's not just Mia Goth that turned Pearl into a modern horror icon. The same moral ambiguity that made the disagreements between the filmmakers in X legitimately compelling is reused here and applied to Pearl in conflict with her mother. Throughout the movie, we see Pearl indulging in fantasies of violence and cruelty, killing farm animals to feed to an alligator, crushing its eggs for fun, victimising her father who's completely powerless to stop her, and generally having a bit of a sadistic streak that only gets worse as her mental stability frays further. It's not helped by how often we see Ruth being hard on her, constantly biting at her for shirking her duties on the farm, wasting money on cinema tickets, and generally having her head in the clouds. So when Pearl and Ruth come to blows, you can kinda see both sides. Pearl is upset and angry at her mother, and vice versa, leaving it up to you to interpret if Pearl's fraying sanity and violent tendencies are more a result of her mother's controlling behaviour, or are the cause of it. Whether Ruth's harshness comes more from necessity and genuine concern for her and her family's safety, or simply down to bitterness about her own miserable situation. If you've not seen Pearl or X, and perhaps even if you have, this sounds like the perfect resume for a killer in the fog. Heaps of moral complexity and emotional conflict, a distinct look and style alongside some brutal kills, all executed by a one-of-a-kind actress in a role that she made unforgettable. But in amongst all its potential comes a pretty glaring problem. And that's an issue of implementation. For a killer, especially a licensed killer, the character has to play into an established mechanical identity. In layman's terms, they have to do something specific to them that nobody else can really do. Sadako's a great example here. She possesses cursed videotapes, climbs out of TVs, and kills you instantly in 7 days. That's her thing, and nobody else does it. So when it came to adding her Dead by Daylight, that's what got turned into her power. Pearl doesn't really have that unique mechanic identity, that modus operandi to turn into her thing that she does in a match of Dead by Daylight. Once she snaps in Pearl and starts to kill people, she gets upset, and starts stabbing or chopping you with whatever farm implements she has to hand, and that's kind of it. I'm sorry, but at least from where I'm standing, I don't think that's enough. We already have a killer with a rage mode that works very well, and fills that design space. What makes Pearl special is not how she kills, but why, and who drove her to it. You can't distill that down to a little icon, a cooldown, and 20 add-ons. Maybe one day behaviour will prove me wrong on this one, but at least for now I'm going to let the idea of Pearl as a killer rest. I love Pearl, I love DVD, but I just can't picture something that would work for her as a killer power that another killer doesn't already do. But just because I don't think Pearl would work as a killer, doesn't mean the X Trilogy has nothing to offer Dead by Daylight. After all, Dead by Daylight's been loving their solo survivor releases lately, and in my opinion they've been the highlights of the past couple of years of content in terms of new character releases. I've been on record saying my favourite releases of Year 8 were the solo survivors Nick Cage and Alan Wake. And while we have 2 new killers to come before the 9th anniversary and I suffer a great reckoning for my sins, my favourite release of Year 9 so far has been another solo survivor, Lara Croft. A solo survivor for an X half chapter would be a great inclusion that could give us something fun between chapter releases, and to show you what I mean, I think it's time we look at the recent instalment in the series and talk once more about Maxxxine Maxxxine. Maxxxine is the direct sequel to X, picking up where that movie left off with Mia Goth's Maxine Minx as the sole survivor of the massacre at the farmhouse. Maxine is living in Los Angeles and has well and truly made it as a porn star, but wants to transfer into mainstream Hollywood acting before she ages out of the adult industry. She finally gets a role as a leading lady in an upcoming horror film under the supervision of the director Elizabeth Bender, but as bodies start to pile up around Maxine and a mysterious detective confronts her with the horrors of her past, Maxine becomes embroiled in a struggle to hold on to both her life and her dreams to become a star. While I think Maxxine is the weakest of the X Trilogy narratively, I can't deny it's a great showcase for our embittered final girl to really let her strut her stuff. To let Maxxine shine on the big screen on her own, without jostling for screen time alongside an ensemble of other filmmakers. While RJ, Lorraine and the rest has similar presences to Maxxine throughout most of X, the supporting cast in Maxxine are very obviously just that, supporting Mia Goth, as she leads this movie and builds on how Maxxine was characterised in X. More than anything else, Maxxine in X was driven by a burning ambition to become a star. You got the sense that the rest of the team were happy or at least not dissatisfied making lowbrow porn flicks. Of the group, only RJ seemed to believe that he had some sort of higher calling beyond just making the movie, because he wanted, on some level, to make a reputable and high quality piece of art. But Maxxine isn't even necessarily interested in that, at least not for the same reasons. Maxxine could not care less about making a work of art that critics will love, and that might stand the test of time. She's in it because she wants the world at her feet. And she's good at acting, she enjoys it, she knows it's the best way she has of achieving her ambitions of fame, fortune and glamour. In X, Maxxine's fight is mostly for her own survival. By the time Maxxine comes around, the stakes have been raised. It's not just her life on the line, but also her future and her dream. And this allows Maxxine to showcase a huge amount of tenacity, grit, and absolutely merciless attitude to anyone who would stand in her way. She's a modern final girl for the ages, captured brilliantly by one of the premier horror stars of our time. If that isn't enough to make it Dead by Daylight as a survivor, I don't know what is. This leaves me, therefore, with a question of perks. Maxxine's role as a final girl is defined by a particular flavour of belligerence. She's not Laurie Strode protecting kids from the boogeyman. She's not Nancy Thompson trying to overcome the lingering trauma of Freddy Krueger, and she definitely isn't Ash Williams, just looking to settle down for a quiet life in Jacksonville amidst the end of the world happening around him. Maxxine is ambitious to a fault, and her style of survival is defined by aggressive responses to threats, while still being careful enough to keep herself alive. Maxxine's a fighter to the core, but doesn't let her heart rule her head. She knows when it's a good idea to run and hide, but only for as long as it takes for her to come back all guns blazing. She also loves the spotlight and tends to draw a lot of attention to herself whether she wants to or not, so any perk set for Maxxine should double down on that to feel like a complete expression of the character. So, without further ado, let's talk about the perks I've designed for her. Our first perk is Steal the Show. When you enter chase with the killer loses all bloodlust they may have. Whenever you take a protection hit for a survivor, you gain bonus healing speed until you become healthy again. Multiple instances of this do not stack, so you can't fuck around with endurance or anything. This perk here is meant to be a reflection of her ambition. She wants to be a star, and that will draw attention to her whether or not she actually wants that attention. It's a perk that encourages the user to take hits and interfere in chases to remove bloodlust from a killer who is chasing somebody else. Our second perk is Crackback. Whenever you lose a health state to any killer attack, Crackback will activate for a short time and highlight the nearest undropped pallet to you in blue. Stunning the killer with that pallet before the time is up will make that stun last 20% longer, and the killer attempting to break that pallet in that period will take 20% longer to do so. Crackback, well, it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Killer hits you, you hit back harder. It's Maxxine's modus operandi. If you move to hurt her, she'll hurt you back so much more. It's simple. We've had perks that play with killer stuns like Dark Arrogance before now, and it's a smash hit synergy perk, so, I just couldn't resist. And the last perk is Boon Defy the Odds. Whenever you bless a boon totem, it will be affected by Defy the Odds until you replace the boon elsewhere, or it's snuffed. When Defy the Odds is placed, the boon totem will ignite itself after 30 seconds if it is left alone. When you're within the area of effect of Defy the Odds, you can press the reassurance button if the boon is ignited to activate Defy the Odds for 8 seconds. You leave no scratch marks or pools of blood, your injured noises are suppressed, and you perform rushed actions silently for the perk's duration. At the end of this duration, Defy the Odds will return to being unignited for 30 seconds and start recharging again. But if you're hit with an attack before the 8 seconds is over, Defy the Odds will snuff itself completely. Defy the Odds introduces a mechanic I've wanted to use in my perk designs for a while, Ignited Boons, where once you light the boon, you leave it for a while to turn the perk on fully and enable a powerful temporary effect. This I thought could be a fun way to enable effects that would be too good to just put on a cooldown, because you'd have to light the boon and then be chased in its area to get the value, but it becomes something that you put down at the start of the match and pass towards later to redeem back the time you spent placing and igniting it. Defy the Odds exemplified Maxxine's ability to get out of impossible situations and live to fight another day by bringing back quiet mode from the anniversary event. This was a really powerful effect that was a lot of fun to use, so similar to how I brought back remote hooks in my Dishonored concept, I'd like to see it brought back in a perk slot where you can jump through some hoops to get a powerful effect that will rearm itself every 30 seconds if you can keep using it to avoid taking hits. And in terms of cosmetics, I think Maxxine got a pretty great lineup. We could start her out in this look from Maxxine with clothing swaps for her outfits in X and Maxxine. I'd imagine the overalls from the Farmer's Daughters shoot in X and her red carpet dress from Maxxine would be popular pickups, but that would pale in comparison to a legendary skin to outfit Maxxine as Pearl. I just know that a Pearl dress with accompanying deranged voice lines would sell like hotcakes, a testament to the enduring popularity and incredible reception of Pearl and the X Trilogy. And of course, give it the filmmakers too, because why not? The 2020s have been a great period in horror history so far, and X, Pearl and Maxxine have been well and truly leading the charge for new horror IPs and their capacity for winning over hearts and minds. Between Dungeons & Dragons, Tomb Raider and Castlevania, main Dead by Daylight players starting to worry that the game is drifting too far from its horror roots, and a chapter or half chapter dedicated to one of the most beloved new horror series out there would be a great way to get things back on course and restore some faith from this game's dedicated horror lovers. These films propelled Mia Goth to stardom within the horror world, and that means there's a home for her in Dead by Daylight, in this great horror hall of fame. I would go on to try and convince you further, but I don't think there's any way that I could say it better than the woman herself.